"Don't hurt her! I'll keep her," he said. "Call her all you want." "I see a woman worth saving." It was late in the evening when the streets were almost empty. The sun had just set, leaving behind a soft orange glow that slowly faded into the night. A chilly wind whispered through the narrow lanes, carrying the scent of dust and damp earth. On one of these streets, a young woman was walking hurriedly, her steps uneven and her hands clutching a small bag tightly against her chest. She looked around nervously, as though she expected someone to appear from the shadows. Her name was Amina, a woman of quiet strength who had been through more hardships than most people her age could imagine. Amina's life had never been easy. She grew up in a small town where opportunities were limited, and kindness was often hard to find. From a young age, she learned to rely on herself. Her parents had loved her, but circumstances forced her to take responsibility early. By the time she reached adulthood, she had faced struggles that left her wary of strangers and cautious in every step. Despite all that, she had a heart that refused to harden completely. She still believed that people could care, that someone could make a difference in her life. On this particular evening, she had been visiting a distant relative in a part of the city she barely knew. The visit, though short, had left her with a sense of unease. She felt eyes watching her, shadows moving in ways they shouldn't. The streets, though familiar in some parts, now felt unfamiliar and threatening. Each step she took made her more alert, more cautious, as if danger could appear at any moment. It was then that she noticed him. At first, she thought he was just another passerby. He stood under the faint light of a street lamp, tall and broad-shouldered with a calmness that contrasted sharply with her own jittery state. He had a look that was gentle yet firm, like someone who had seen much but still cared deeply. His eyes met hers for a brief second, and she instinctively felt a mixture of wariness and curiosity. The man's name was Omar. He was someone who had spent much of his life helping others, quietly and without recognition. He had seen suffering in many forms and had made it his quiet mission to protect those who could not protect themselves. On this evening, he had been walking home from work, his mind filled with ordinary thoughts about daily life, when he noticed her. Something about the way she moved, the tension in her posture, and the fear in her eyes made him pause. He could sense that she was in danger, or at least that she felt it. As Amina walked past him, she almost didn't notice that someone was following her. A shadow shifted in the distance, quick and deliberate. Her heart pounded, and she quickened her pace, hoping to reach a busier street. But the shadow mirrored her steps, closing in with alarming precision. Panic surged through her, and she found herself trapped in a moment where her past fears collided with the present danger. Omar noticed the tension immediately. Without hesitation, he stepped slightly ahead, subtly positioning himself between her and the approaching threat. He didn't speak at first. Sometimes words could do more harm than good. Instead, he moved with calm confidence, making sure his presence was known. The shadow slowed, almost instinctively recognizing that he was not alone in the street anymore. Amina felt a strange mix of fear and relief. She didn't know him, yet something about him reassured her. She wanted to turn and run, but she also felt that perhaps, for the first time in a long while, someone was there to watch over her. Her instincts told her to trust cautiously, to observe before letting her guard down. And so she continued walking, with Omar silently following, keeping a careful distance that was protective but not intrusive. The shadow behind her didn't give up easily. A voice called out, sharp and threatening, trying to provoke a reaction. Amina's fear spiked, and she stumbled slightly on the uneven pavement. That was all it took. Omar moved quickly, his presence now unmistakable, stepping in front of her with a firm stance that spoke of authority and protection. "Don't hurt her," he said, his voice steady but commanding. There was no arrogance in his tone, only a resolute promise. The shadow hesitated. There was something in Omar's eyes, a quiet strength that seemed to say this confrontation would not be easy. Without another word, the threatening figure melted back into the darkness, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. Amina stood frozen for a moment, her heart racing, trying to comprehend what had just happened. She looked at Omar, and for the first time that evening she allowed herself to breathe.
"You're safe now," Omar said gently.
You can keep walking. I'll make sure no one follows you. He didn't demand anything from her. He didn't assume she needed saving in a way that would make her feel weak. Instead, he offered protection while respecting her dignity, allowing her to regain her composure.
Amina's voice trembled as she finally spoke.
Why? Why did you help me? She asked. It was a simple question, but it carried the weight of years of mistrust and fear. Omar smiled faintly, a smile that was warm but not forced. Because no one deserves to feel unsafe like that, he replied. Because I can, and because I believe every person has a chance to be protected, even in moments like this. There was a pause, filled with an unspoken understanding. Amina could feel his sincerity, and for the first time she felt the possibility of trust. It wasn't blind trust, but a small seed had been planted. The hope that there were people who would step forward simply because it was the right thing to do. As they walked together toward a busier street, Omar didn't rush her. He matched her pace, staying a few steps behind, giving her the space to feel safe yet supported. They spoke little, only exchanging casual words, but each word carried reassurance. Amina noticed small details about him, the calmness in his voice, the steadiness of his movements, and the way he seemed to anticipate danger before it arrived. By the time they reached the busier part of the city, Amina felt a strange sense of gratitude mixed with cautious curiosity. She didn't know him, yet she felt that her life had been touched by someone who genuinely cared. Omar, on the other hand, observed her closely, recognizing the resilience beneath her fear. He knew that helping her tonight was only the beginning. She was someone worth protecting, someone whose life could be changed by a simple act of kindness. Before parting ways, Omar said softly, almost as an afterthought, "Call her all you want, but remember, she is worth saving."
The words were simple, yet they carried a promise.
Amina didn't fully understand them in that moment, but they lingered in her mind, planting the thought that perhaps she didn't have to face the world entirely alone. As she continued her journey home, Amina reflected on the evening. She thought about how easily fear could consume a person, and how rare it was to find someone who would intervene purely out of care. The streets that had once felt threatening now seemed a little less daunting. She realized that while danger existed, so did kindness, and sometimes it arrived in the form of a stranger willing to stand between you and harm. That night, Amina went to sleep with a sense of cautious hope. She didn't know what the future held, and she didn't know if she would ever see Omar again, but one thing was certain. For the first time in a long while, she felt that there were people in the world who could see her worth, who could recognize that she deserved safety, respect, and care. And that thought, fragile yet powerful, gave her the courage to face tomorrow. Amina tried to put the events of that evening behind her, but the memory of fear lingered like a shadow she could not shake. She returned to her small apartment, locking the door behind her and peering through the peephole to ensure she was truly alone. Even in the safety of her home, her heart raced, and she could not help thinking about the man who had appeared when she needed help the most. His calm presence and quiet strength had stayed with her, like a small light in the darkness that she hadn't known she was searching for. The next few days were difficult. Amina noticed familiar patterns of unease returning. She would glance over her shoulder while walking to the store, jump at sudden noises outside her window, and hesitate before answering phone calls. The shadow of that threatening figure from the street seemed to linger even though he had disappeared that night. She realized that while the immediate danger was gone, the feeling of being unsafe was not so easily chased away. One evening, as she walked back from work, her instincts screamed that something was wrong. She felt eyes on her again, heavier and more deliberate than before. Her pace quickened, but the streets were quieter than usual. Just as panic started to set in, a familiar voice called out softly from behind her, "Amina! Wait!" She turned and saw Omar approaching. There was no fear in his expression, only calm concern. Relief washed over her, but she still kept a careful distance, unsure of what to say. "I thought I might see you again," he said, his voice gentle. "I wanted to make sure you were safe." Amina hesitated. She did not know how to respond. Part of her wanted to run, to retreat to the safety of her apartment, but another part of her, a part that longed for protection and trust, wanted to hear what he had to say. Slowly, she allowed him to walk beside her. As they moved through the dimly lit streets, Omar asked simple questions about her day, her work, and her plans. But he did so without prying too much. He seemed to understand the delicate line between protection and intrusion. Amina, for the first time in a long while, felt comfortable talking to someone who did not judge her or make her feel small. Days turned into weeks, and Omar continued to appear at unexpected moments. Sometimes it was a brief encounter on her way home from work. Other times he would arrive with groceries or small gifts of care, knowing she lived alone. Amina began to notice that his presence was more than just random coincidence. He seemed to watch over her, ensuring that she was not left vulnerable. At first, she felt conflicted. She was not used to kindness, and she questioned whether she deserved it. But as time passed, she began to see that Omar's intentions were pure. He never demanded anything from her, never tried to control her actions, and never judged her for the life she had led. His actions were simple yet powerful. A steady hand when she stumbled, a reassuring word when fear took hold, and a silent promise that she would never face danger alone while he was near. One evening, a storm rolled into the city. Rain poured in thick sheets, turning streets into slippery rivers and making it difficult for anyone to walk without being drenched. Amina was caught outside after leaving work unexpectedly late. She struggled with her umbrella, the wind threatening to tear it from her hands when she felt a protective presence beside her. Omar was there, holding a larger umbrella over both of them. Without saying a word, he guided her through the puddles and toward her apartment. She noticed how effortlessly he navigated the chaos, always keeping her safe, and she could not help but feel a growing admiration for him. It was not just about protection. It was about respect and understanding, qualities that she had rarely seen in others. Over time, Amina learned small details about Omar. He had a quiet life of his own, working a regular job but spending much of his free time helping people in his neighborhood. He had seen many forms of struggle, loss, abuse, loneliness, and he had made it his mission to intervene when he could. Yet despite his own hardships, he never forced his help on anyone. Instead, he offered it in ways that preserved dignity and choice. Amina began to feel a shift within herself. She started walking more confidently, opening doors for herself that she had previously avoided. She still carried the weight of her past, but Omar's presence reminded her that she was not defined by fear. She realized that the act of being cared for without strings or judgment was teaching her to trust again.
Yet, the shadows of danger had not disappeared entirely.
One evening, she noticed a figure lingering near the entrance of her apartment building. Her heart raced, and memories of past threats returned sharply. She wanted to retreat, but before panic could take over, Omar appeared from around the corner, calm and composed. Without hesitation, he approached the figure, his presence alone enough to make them hesitate. "Step away," he said quietly yet firmly. The figure, recognizing that they were not dealing with a helpless person anymore, quickly left. Amina watched the scene unfold, her fear slowly transforming into gratitude and awe. She realized that Omar's protection was not just about strength. It was about presence, attention, and knowing when to act. That night, as they stood under the streetlight, she finally spoke. "Why do you keep helping me?" "You don't even know me." Omar looked at her, his expression serious but kind. "Because someone should," he said. "Because everyone deserves to feel safe. And because I see someone who is worth protecting. Not because you need me, but because you deserve it." Those words stayed with Amina long after he left. They were not empty promises. They were a recognition of her value, her strength, and her right to safety. Slowly, she began to internalize that belief, understanding that protection was not weakness and accepting care was not shame. The days continued, each bringing small challenges and victories. Amina started to rebuild her life, taking cautious steps toward independence while learning that trust could be given gradually. She still faced moments of fear, but Omar's quiet support was a constant reminder that she was not alone. Evenings became a time of reflection for her. She would sit by her window, looking out at the city lights, thinking about the man who had changed the way she viewed the world. His presence had been a turning point, showing her that kindness and protection could exist without expectation, and that someone could see her worth even when she struggled to see it herself. Through all of this, Amina realized something important. True protection was not about possession or control. It was about understanding, respect, and a willingness to act when necessary. Omar had not told her what to do or how to live. He had simply been there when danger appeared, and had allowed her to regain strength on her own. That subtle difference made all the impact. By the end of Part 2, Amina's life was slowly transforming. Fear still lingered at the edges, but hope was beginning to take root. She was learning to navigate the world with a renewed sense of self, knowing that she was valued, and that help could come without judgment or demand. She began to see that her story was not defined solely by past hardships or moments of fear, but also by the courage and kindness of those who truly cared. And as she looked forward to the days ahead, she knew that no matter what challenges arose, she had someone who saw her as more than just a person in danger, someone who recognized her as a woman worth saving. Time passed, and Amina felt herself changing. She was beginning to move through the world with a little more confidence than before. She still remembered the fear that had followed her, but it no longer controlled her every action. She had learned to take cautious steps, to trust her instincts, and, most importantly, to accept the quiet support that Omar offered. Omar, too, had become a part of her life, though neither of them said it aloud. He did not intrude, nor did he demand attention. Instead, he appeared at moments that mattered most, always calm, always steady, always aware of her boundaries. The more she noticed him, the more she realized that his protection was not just about safety. It was about giving her space to grow while remaining a silent guardian. One morning as Amina walked to work, she felt an unusual heaviness in the air. The streets were quieter than usual, and even the distant sounds of cars and chatter seemed muted. She sensed that something was wrong but could not place it. As she turned a corner, she noticed a man standing near the entrance of her building. His posture was deliberate, and he seemed to be waiting. Her heart jumped, and for a moment, panic threatened to take over. Before she could move, Omar appeared, stepping out from an alleyway with a calm determination. His presence was immediate and grounding. "Go back inside," he said quietly yet firmly. "I'll handle this!" Amina hesitated, unsure whether to follow his instructions, but she could sense his confidence, and she slowly retreated toward her apartment door. From her window, she watched as Omar approached the man. She could not hear their conversation, but she saw the way Omar stood, protective, unwavering, ready to act if necessary. The man lingered for a moment, seemed to measure Omar's determination, and then, after a tense silence, turned and walked away. Amina exhaled deeply, her body trembling. She realized that her fear had not entirely disappeared, but she also understood that Omar's protection was real and reliable. She felt a surge of gratitude and a quiet relief that she could not fully describe. Later that day, Omar appeared at her apartment, as if sensing that she needed reassurance. He brought no gifts, no words of comfort, just his presence, calm and steady. "Are you all right?" he asked simply. His eyes met hers, and she saw the sincerity in his gaze. Amina nodded, though her voice was soft. I think so," she said. She wanted to explain how scared she had been, how helpless, how much his presence had meant, but the words felt heavy and inadequate. Instead, she simply allowed him to stay for a few moments, sitting nearby without pressuring her to speak. It was during this time that Amina began to realize something profound. Omar's protection was not just physical, it was emotional too. He gave her the space to feel fear without judgment, the courage to confront it, and the reassurance that she was valued. This understanding began to deepen the bond between them, though it was quiet and unspoken. Days later, she faced another challenge. At work, she had encountered a situation that reminded her of past difficulties. Criticism that felt unfair, a misunderstanding that threatened her position, and the subtle pressure of colleagues who doubted her abilities. She felt the familiar rush of anxiety, the sense that she could not handle the situation alone. After work, Omar met her at the usual corner. "Tell me what happened," he said gently. She hesitated, unsure if she should burden him with her problems, but the trust she had slowly developed allowed her to speak. She explained the situation, her fears, and the frustration that had built inside her. Omar listened quietly, never interrupting, never dismissing her feelings. When she finished, he spoke in a calm and measured voice. "You handled it better than you realize," he said. "People will always judge, always doubt, but that doesn't define your worth. You are capable, and you have the right to stand firm." Those words struck Amina deeply. For so long she had doubted herself, had believed that her fears and mistakes defined her. But Omar's faith in her ability to navigate challenges was different. It was not about controlling her or telling her what to do. It was about affirming that she had strength she could rely on. As the days turned into weeks, their bond grew in small, meaningful ways. Amina began to reach out more often, asking for advice, sharing small victories, and even allowing herself moments of laughter in Omar's presence. He, in turn, responded with steady support, always encouraging her autonomy while being ready to act when necessary. One evening, Amina found herself in a particularly vulnerable moment. She had received news about a relative who was in trouble, and the weight of responsibility felt overwhelming. She had no one else to turn to, and fear and worry threatened to consume her. Without hesitation, she called Omar. He arrived within minutes, bringing calm and reassurance. "We'll face this together," he said simply. He did not take over, nor did he attempt to fix everything for her. Instead, he guided her through the problem, offering advice, helping her make decisions, and showing her that she could handle difficult situations with support. During this time, Amina began to reflect on what it meant to be truly protected. She realized that Omar's care was different from anything she had experienced before. It was not about possession or control. It was about recognition and respect. He saw her as capable, as strong, and as deserving of safety and support. His words, actions, and steady presence all conveyed a belief in her worth. It was also during this period that Omar shared a piece of his own story. One evening, as they walked through a quiet park, he spoke about a time when he had failed to protect someone he cared about. The memory was painful, and he admitted that it had driven him to be more vigilant, more attentive to those in need. Amina listened, understanding that his protection came from a place of empathy and experience. She saw that he was not perfect, but his heart was in the right place and his intentions were genuine. Through these shared experiences, a quiet trust blossomed between them. Amina began to feel that she could rely on Omar not out of dependency, but because he had shown her that true support respects boundaries and encourages growth. She was learning that asking for help did not make her weak. It made her human. However, the world outside continued to pose challenges. There were moments when fear resurfaced, when past threats seemed to linger, and when uncertainty clouded her judgment. But each time Omar's presence offered a reminder, she was not alone, and her life had value. His protection was a shield, but it was also a mirror reflecting her own strength, courage, and worth. By the end of this period, Amina had grown in ways she could not have imagined. She walked with more confidence, spoke with more assurance, and faced challenges with a steadier heart. And while the shadow of danger had not completely disappeared, she knew that she had someone beside her who believed in her, who would act when necessary, and who had seen something in her worth saving. That realization marked a turning point. Amina no longer saw herself solely as a person who needed protection. She saw herself as someone capable of resilience, supported by a presence that encouraged her growth without diminishing her independence. And Omar, in turn, saw that his efforts were making a difference, not by controlling her, but by allowing her to discover her own strength while remaining a steadfast guardian.
As they parted one evening, Omar placed a hand lightly on her shoulder.
"You are stronger than you know," he said quietly. "And you are worth every effort to protect." Amina looked at him, feeling the weight of his words settle in her heart. Death to the turncoat! She knew that she had not only been saved from immediate danger, but had also been given something far more valuable: the recognition that she deserved care, respect, and the chance to grow into the life she wanted. The calm that Amina had begun to enjoy was suddenly interrupted. One afternoon, as she walked home from work, a familiar unease settled in her chest. The streets seemed quieter than usual, almost unnaturally so. and a sense of being watched returned with an intensity she hadn't felt in weeks. Her pace quickened, her hands clutching her bag tightly, and she tried to ignore the rising panic. Then she noticed him, a man she had seen before, lingering at a distance, his gaze fixed on her. Fear shot through her like lightning. Memories of past threats, the shadowy figure that had first appeared weeks ago, and the nights spent on edge all came rushing back. She wanted to run, to disappear into the safety of her apartment, but her legs felt heavy, almost frozen with terror. Before the man could approach, Omar appeared. He emerged from the corner of a side street, his eyes immediately locking on the threat. His presence was calm yet resolute, like a rock standing against the crashing waves. "Stay behind me," he said quietly, but with a firmness that left no room for argument. Amina obeyed instinctively, feeling both relief and gratitude. The man hesitated, clearly sizing up Omar. He had expected an easy confrontation, someone vulnerable to intimidate. But Omar's calm, confident stance told a different story. Amina watched, tense, as the situation unfolded. Her heart pounded, but there was a strange sense of reassurance in knowing that she was not alone. The man finally retreated, muttering under his breath, but the fear did not vanish entirely. Amina knew that this could be the beginning of something more serious, and she realized that her life could be at risk if she did not act carefully. She needed guidance, protection, and support more than ever before. That evening, Omar insisted on walking her home despite her initial protests. "I cannot leave you in danger," he said simply. "Not after this." Amina understood his concern, and though she valued her independence, she allowed him to accompany her. They moved quickly through the streets, but Omar remained calm, scanning the surroundings, alert to any unusual movement. Once inside her apartment, Amina locked the door and sank onto the couch, the weight of fear pressing down on her. She realized that the danger she had once thought was gone was very much real. "I can't stop feeling like this," she admitted softly. "I'm tired of being afraid all the time." Omar sat beside her, a reassuring presence without imposing on her space. "Fear is natural," he said. "It reminds us to be careful, to stay aware. But it doesn't have to control you. You have more strength than you think, and you are not alone." His words were steady, unshakable, carrying a calm authority that slowly began to ease her panic. The next few days were tense. Amina noticed the man again, at a distance, lingering near her workplace and occasionally near her apartment building. She realized that he was deliberately trying to intimidate her, to make her feel unsafe. Each encounter left her shaken, but she was learning to rely on the skills and instincts that Omar had helped her develop. Omar, too, took careful measures. He accompanied her when needed, but he also taught her how to recognize danger, avoid risky situations, and trust her instincts. He never overstepped or smothered her. Instead, he empowered her to protect herself while ensuring that help was available when necessary. One evening, the threat escalated. Amina had left work late and was walking through a dimly lit street when the man suddenly blocked her path. Panic surged, but before he could act, Omar appeared, his presence immediate and commanding. "Step aside," Omar said, his voice firm and unwavering. The man, recognizing that this was no ordinary confrontation, hesitated and finally backed off, disappearing into the shadows.
Amina's hands trembled, but she felt a surge of gratitude and relief.
Omar had once again acted decisively, without judgment, ensuring her safety while giving her space to remain calm. She realized that protection was not just about strength, it was about timing, awareness, and the quiet ability to intervene when necessary. In the days that followed, Amina and Omar continued to navigate the tense situation together. He helped her feel more confident in public, taught her strategies to avoid confrontation, and reminded her that she was not alone. Slowly, she began to feel more in control, more capable of facing challenges without being overwhelmed by fear. Their bond deepened during this time. Amina began to see Omar not just as a protector, but as someone who truly cared about her well-being. She trusted his judgment, respected his guidance, and appreciated the quiet way he offered support. She noticed small details about him, the patience in his voice, the attentiveness in his eyes, and the way he seemed to anticipate danger before it arrived. One evening, as they walked through a quiet park to avoid crowded streets, Omar spoke softly. You've grown stronger in these weeks, he said. Not just in facing danger, but in trusting yourself and others. That courage is yours, but it's okay to lean on support when needed. Amina felt the truth of his words. She had indeed grown, learning to balance caution with confidence, independence with trust. Despite these victories, the threat was not gone. Amina realized that she could not let fear dictate her life, but she also could not ignore the danger. She made careful plans, changing her routes, informing friends and colleagues, and remaining vigilant. Omar supported these measures, offering advice and assistance without undermining her autonomy. One night, a particularly frightening incident occurred. Amina had returned home late and noticed the man standing near her building once again. Her heart raced, and for a moment she froze, unsure of what to do. Then Omar appeared, moving swiftly but calmly to confront the threat. His presence was commanding, yet there was no aggression, just a firm insistence that she was safe. The man finally fled, and Amina allowed herself a moment of relief. She realized that she was beginning to understand the balance between fear and strength, between vigilance and trust. Omar's support had taught her that danger could be managed, and that protection did not diminish her independence. It enhanced it. Through these experiences, Amina also came to appreciate the deeper meaning of Omar's words from the beginning, that she was a woman worth saving. It was not just about physical safety. It was about recognition, respect, and the belief that she deserved care and protection. That belief had given her the courage to face threats, to trust her instincts, and to rely on help without feeling weak. By the end of this period, Amina had transformed in subtle but significant ways. She walked with more confidence, faced challenges with determination, and recognized the value of trust and support. The world outside was still filled with risks, but she knew that she had someone who would act decisively when needed, someone who saw her strength and worth. The lessons of these weeks were clear. True protection is not about control, but about presence, not about fear, but about respect and trust. Omar had shown her that courage could coexist with vulnerability, that independence could coexist with support, and that recognition of one's worth could be a powerful source of strength. As they parted one evening, Omar looked at her with calm certainty. No matter what comes, you have the strength to face it, and I'll always be here if you need me. Amina nodded, feeling the weight and reassurance of his words. She realized that the bond between them had deepened beyond fear or danger. It was now rooted in trust, respect, and the knowledge that she was valued. And as she stood in the quiet of her apartment that night, Amina understood something important. Life would always have challenges, but the combination of courage, trust, and genuine support could make even the most daunting obstacles manageable. She had been tested, she had faced fear, and she had learned that being protected did not diminish her power, it amplified it. Days passed after the last encounter with the man who had caused Amina so much fear. The streets seemed calmer, the city less threatening, but Amina could not let herself forget the lessons she had learned. She had grown stronger, more alert, and more confident in facing challenges alone. Yet she also knew that true strength was not about isolation. It was about having the courage to accept help when it was offered, and she had learned that Omar's presence was a gift, not a crutch. One morning she woke to sunlight streaming through her window, feeling a strange mixture of relief and hope. The city was waking up, people walking past her apartment, cars humming along the streets. She realized that she could finally breathe without constant fear pressing on her chest. She had faced danger before, and though it had left its mark, she knew she was capable of facing whatever life might bring next. As she stepped out of her apartment, she noticed Omar waiting nearby, as he often did, though never imposing. His presence was comforting, a quiet reminder that someone who cared about her well-being was close. "Good morning," he said simply, with that calm smile that always seemed to ease the tension in her chest. "Good morning," she replied, her voice steadier than it had been weeks ago. She noticed how much she had changed, her steps confident, her eyes alert but not fearful, her posture upright and self-assured. Omar noticed it too, and though he did not comment directly, there was a subtle nod of approval in his expression. Their days continued in a balance of cautious normalcy and subtle vigilance. Amina returned to her routines with a new sense of strength, walking to work with her head held high, speaking up when needed, and trusting her instincts more than ever before. She realized that the fear that had once consumed her was not gone, but it no longer defined her. It was a reminder of how far she had come, and she carried that reminder with quiet pride. One afternoon, as she was leaving work, she received a phone call from a friend, letting her know that a neighbor had seen someone suspicious near her apartment. Her heart skipped a beat, but she did not panic as she once would have. She knew she had the tools to handle the situation, and she also knew that Omar would be there if needed. True to form, Omar appeared swiftly, moving beside her with calm efficiency. "We'll handle this together," he said. "Nothing will happen to you." His words were not patronizing. They were a promise, a reminder that protection could coexist with independence. As they approached her apartment, the suspicious figure was nowhere in sight. It became clear that the threat had moved on, that the fear she had carried for weeks was fading. Amina felt an unexpected wave of relief and accomplishment. She had faced danger, learned to protect herself, and had trusted someone enough to allow help when necessary. And now, the streets felt safer, the shadows less menacing, and life a little brighter. In the days that followed, Amina began to reclaim parts of her life that had been limited by fear. She visited friends she had avoided, explored new parts of the city, and even started considering opportunities she had once thought impossible. With Omar's guidance, she realized that life did not have to be dominated by anxiety and that strength could coexist with care. Their bond, strengthened by weeks of shared experiences and challenges, continued to grow. Amina understood that Omar's support was more than just protection from physical threats. It was emotional, spiritual, and moral support as well. He had helped her rediscover her worth, her courage, and her ability to face life's uncertainties with hope. She no longer felt like a fragile person in need of saving. She felt like a strong, capable woman who had been reminded that she deserved respect, safety, and care. One evening, as they walked along the riverbank, the sun dipping into the horizon, Omar spoke quietly. "You've come a long way," he said. "The world can be harsh, but you've proven that courage and trust can make a difference. I've always known you were worth saving, but now you see it yourself." Amina looked at him, feeling the depth of his words. She realized that the phrase "worth saving" did not mean she was helpless. It meant that she was valued, recognized, and respected. It was a belief that had carried her through fear, guided her through danger, and strengthened her resolve. She felt a wave of gratitude, not only for the protection he had offered, but for the understanding and care that had allowed her to grow. Over time, she also noticed how Omar had become more than a protector. He was a friend, a confidant, and someone who encouraged her to embrace life fully. They shared laughter, conversations about dreams and ambitions, and quiet moments of reflection. Amina felt a sense of connection she had never experienced before, one that was built on trust, respect, and shared experiences. One weekend, they visited a small cafe by the park. Amina looked around, noticing how normal life seemed. People enjoying coffee, children playing, the sun casting golden light across the streets. It was ordinary, yet it felt extraordinary to her. She realized that she was finally able to experience life without constant fear, that she could appreciate small joys, and that she could trust in the goodness of others without hesitation. Omar watched her with quiet satisfaction. He had never sought recognition or thanks. His satisfaction came from knowing that she had grown stronger, more confident, and more resilient. He had acted when necessary, guided her when asked, and allowed her to take her own steps toward independence. In many ways, the journey had been as much about him as it had been about her, teaching him patience, empathy, and the power of quiet support. Weeks later, Amina received a letter from a distant relative she had once feared confronting. She hesitated at first, unsure if she wanted to reopen old wounds. But with Omar's encouragement, she decided to respond. She faced the conversation calmly, asserting her boundaries while expressing her intentions clearly. The result was peaceful, even positive, and she felt an enormous sense of relief. She realized that the skills she had developed, courage, trust, vigilance, were not just about danger, but about navigating life confidently. By the time the months had passed, Amina felt transformed. She walked through the city streets with confidence, spoke to colleagues without hesitation, and faced challenges with strength and grace. The world still had dangers, as it always would, but she no longer felt powerless. She understood the balance between independence and support, between courage and caution, and between fear and hope. One evening, Omar joined her on a quiet rooftop overlooking the city. The lights sparkled below, the air was cool and fresh, and the sense of calm was profound. "You've grown," he said softly. "You faced fear, accepted support, and discovered your strength. I'm proud of you, not because I saved you, but because you trusted yourself enough to grow." Amina smiled, feeling warmth and gratitude in her heart. She realized that she had been saved in many ways, not just from physical danger, but from fear, doubt, and isolation. She had been reminded of her worth, her courage, and her ability to face life fully. And as she looked at Omar, she knew that the bond they shared was more than protection. It was trust, respect, and mutual recognition of strength and humanity. In the quiet of that night, Amina understood a profound truth. Being worth saving was not about weakness or dependence. It was about value, respect, and care. It was about someone believing in you when you might doubt yourself, about standing beside someone while allowing them to grow, and about finding courage in connection rather than isolation. And as the city lights shimmered around them, Amina felt hope blooming inside her. She had survived danger, embraced support, and discovered her own strength. She had faced fear and found courage. She had been protected, guided, and recognized, and most importantly, she had been reminded that she was a woman worth saving, not because she needed someone to save her, but because her life, her courage, and her spirit mattered. The future stretched ahead, full of possibilities. Amina was ready to face it with confidence, knowing that she carried the lessons of the past with her, and that she had someone beside her who believed in her, supported her, and respected her independence. The streets she once feared now seemed full of life and opportunity, and she knew that she could move forward, embracing each day with strength, dignity, and hope. And in that quiet, unspoken way, Omar's presence continued to remind her of something she had discovered all along. That courage, trust, and support were not signs of weakness. They were the truest expressions of human strength.